corrupt judge refuses to hear a black elderly man's case. What the man does next is shocking. Elijah Carter stood in courtroom 4B, tall, proud, yet aged by time. In his hands, a photo of his late wife Ruth and a folder filled with deeds, tax receipts, and land records dating back to 1867, when his great-grandfather, a freed slave, bought the land they were now trying to take. The courtroom was cold, both in air and in spirit. Harsh fluorescent lights bounced off marble walls and polished shoes. No one looked at Elijah with respect. Some glanced with contempt. Others smirked as if he was already defeated. A woman in the third row whispered behind her hand. Another one of them clinging to history like it still matters. A man beside her chuckled. Then came the sound that made every spine snap straight. All rise for the Honorable Judge Winston Bexley. The heavy oak doors swung open, and in walked the man who would determine the Carter family's fate. Judge Bexley's black robes trailed behind him like a shadow hungry for light. His silver hair was slicked back, face stone-carved and expressionless, except for the permanent crease of disdain between his brows. He didn't look at Elijah, not even once, as he adjusted himself in the leather chair behind the bench and flicked open the case file with disinterest. Carter versus Kingsland Development Corporation, the clerk announced. Elijah's lawyer, a public defender, barely out of law school, fumbled with his notes. Your Honor, Mr. Carter is here today to contest the wrongful seizure of his family's property, land that has been in his family for over 150 years. He has substantial documentation, including the original deed. Approach the bench. Judge Bexley cut him off with the crispness of a blade. He didn't glance up. Elijah stood. Each step toward the bench was a lifetime. The soles of his shoes echoed across the polished floor like slow thunder, and with each footfall he could feel the eyes of the room pressing on him, judging, dismissing, erasing. He stopped at the podium, cleared his throat. Your Honor, he began, voice steady but not without tremor, this land, my family's land, was purchased in 1867 by Benjamin Carter, my great-grandfather. We've paid every tax, fought through every storm. My wife Ruth, God rest her soul, documented every inch of that property. I have here the original deed, notarized receipts, and property records going back 4 generations. That won't be necessary, Judge Bexley interrupted, waving a hand without looking up. Elijah blinked, unsure. Sir, the documents show... Mr. Carter, Bexley said, finally raising his icy gaze. This court recognizes current ownership records filed with the county, which reflect a valid transfer of title to Kingsland Development. Unless you have evidence of a criminal conspiracy, which I doubt, you are wasting the court's time. But Your Honor, Elijah insisted, holding up the folder like it contained his soul. Those records were falsified. My wife, before she passed, she gathered proof. If you just... I said that won't be necessary, Bexley thundered, slamming his gavel. The crack echoed like a gunshot. The gallery stirred. A few snickers. Someone muttered, Here we go again. Elijah stood frozen, face flushed, breathing uneven. This court, Bexley said, voice like glass breaking, does not exist to entertain sentimental tales about ancestors and forgotten farmland. Your claims are antiquated, irrelevant. This is a modern legal system, not a history museum. The gavel came down again, harder. Case dismissed. The words struck Elijah like fists. His hands dropped. The folder slipped from his fingers, papers spilling across the floor like the scattered bones of his legacy. No one moved to help him. No one cared. The bailiff approached, nudging him with impersonal efficiency. Sir, you'll need to leave. Elijah didn't argue. He bent down slowly, painfully, gathering the pieces of his past off the cold floor. The courtroom buzzed with whispered amusement. Should have sold the land when he had the chance, someone scoffed. He turned and walked out, holding Ruth's photo tightly, like it was the last thing tethering him to sanity. The doors of the courtroom closed behind him with a dull thud, like the ceiling of a tomb. Outside, the corridor was equally unfeeling. Lawyers brushed past him, phones rang, paperwork flew, and in the middle of it all, Elijah Carter stood still, a man who had just been erased by a system designed to forget men like him. His breath caught in his throat, not from age, but from humiliation so deep it burned. The judge hadn't even looked at the documents, hadn't read a single page, hadn't acknowledged the generations of sacrifice wrapped in those yellowing papers. That courtroom didn't just dismiss a case, it dismissed a history, a bloodline, a promise. Elijah walked out of the courthouse, the wind slicing through his coat, the city moving on without him. Above him, the American flag flapped in the wind, a symbol that once meant something, once gave men like him hope. But today, it only reminded him of everything that had been stolen. And the war he had no choice but to keep fighting. Elijah Carter stepped into his apartment like a man returning from war, scarred, silent, and carrying the weight of something no one else could see. The door creaked shut behind him with a low groan, echoing the exhaustion in his bones. Outside, the city pulsed on, oblivious. Inside, silence pressed in around him like a fog. He stood there for a long moment, unmoving, the courtroom's final gavel still pounding in his memory like a war drum. Then, as if guided by something deeper than thought, Elijah walked to the corner of the room where Ruth's chair still sat, untouched since the day she passed. Beside it, on the shelf lined with family Bibles and photo albums, was the small wooden box he had almost forgotten existed. The grain of the oak was worn smooth by her hands. His fingers trembled as he reached for it. He set it gently on the dining table, sat down and opened the lid. There it was. Ruth's journal. Bound in faded blue leather, the edges soft from use, it smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. Elijah ran a hand over the cover. Her handwriting had always been elegant, tight cursive lines that never wavered, even when her body had begun to fail her. She had written in this every night after dinner, always saying, one day someone might need to know the truth. He hadn't understood back then. He did now. He flipped it open. Page after page unfolded like a weapon carefully assembled in silence. Names, dates, copies of documents, receipts, annotated property tax changes, and more than anything, patterns. July 3rd, received second tax notice this month. Amount increased by $417 without explanation. I called the office. They claimed it was a clerical update, but the neighbor down the road, Mr. Tilson, said his taxes went up the same day. Same amount. He's black too. September 11th. Spoke to the woman at the assessor's office again. She wouldn't put anything in writing. Told me off record. There's talk of redevelopment zones. I'd keep my head down if I were you. October 28th. Someone from Kingsland Development showed up at our door. Said they could help with the paperwork if we were willing to sign a few things. Offered cash on the spot. I told them to leave. Elijah was furious. Each entry burned. Each line was a blade, cutting through years of quiet hope. Elijah read in silence, his heart a drumbeat of rage and sorrow. Ruth had seen it all, and she had written it down, not for herself, for him, for whoever would listen. Keys rattled at the door. A moment later, Andre stepped inside, his laptop bag slung over one shoulder, face flushed from the cold and frustration. I came as soon as I saw the news, he said, voice tight. They really just threw it out, didn't they? Elijah looked up from the journal, eyes heavy with grief. Didn't even read a single page, he whispered. Didn't even look at Ruth's work. Andre's jaw clenched. He walked over and took the seat beside his grandfather, scanning the open pages of the diary. She documented all this? Every last thing, Elijah said, pushing the journal toward him. She knew they'd come for it, knew they'd try to erase us. She wrote it all down. Andre's fingers danced across the pages. He could see the precision, the patterns, the way Ruth had lined up timestamps, transaction records, handwritten receipts. She was methodical. This is evidence, real evidence. But it's not enough, is it? Elijah asked, voice barely audible. They already took the land. The judge's word is law. Andre's eyes flicked up. Maybe the law's broken, but that doesn't mean we can't use the truth. He stood abruptly and walked to the corner of the room where an old radio sat on the shelf, a clunky relic from another era. It had been Ruth's favorite. She used to sit beside it on Sunday mornings, listening to gospel while tending to her plants. Andre knelt down, studying it. Elijah, he said slowly, did Grandma ever mention keeping backups of this? Elijah frowned. She said she mailed a few things to her sister, but backups? Like digital? Andre carefully turned the radio around. The back panel was loose. He pried it open and froze. Inside, tucked in a hollowed-out cavity behind the speaker, was a flash drive, taped in place, labeled in Ruth's careful handwriting. If they take the papers, the truth lives here. Andre exhaled slowly. She was 3 steps ahead of them. He plugged it into his laptop. The screen blinked to life. Dozens of folders appeared. Scanned deeds, tax payment screenshots, recorded phone calls, photos of visits from real estate reps, even time-stamped logs of mail with mysteriously altered postmarks. And then, an Excel file titled Cross-Match Patterns. Andre opened it, his breath caught. Holy! He stopped himself. Grandpa, do you see this? It's not just your land. She tracked 12 other families. Same tactics, same timelines, same forged tax adjustments, same courtrooms. Elijah's eyes narrowed. It was never just about me. No, Andre said, eyes locked to the screen. This is a machine, a system designed to rob people like you, and Grandma documented every gear. The room felt smaller suddenly, like the truth was taking up too much space to fit within 4 walls. Andre copied the files to an encrypted drive, his hands moving fast. We're taking this to someone who'll listen. If the courts won't hear it, the public will. Journalists, civil rights lawyers. This is too big to bury. Elijah stood, slower now, but taller than before. His hand rested on Ruth's journal, his fingers trembling. She gave everything to keep this safe, he said quietly. Even when cancer ate her bones, she stayed up late printing copies, writing names, hiding drives. She told me, they'll try to silence you, so I'll speak louder, on paper. Andre looked up. Then let's make her voice thunder. But as the truth began to spread beyond closed courtrooms and dusty archives, the cost of speaking out grew heavier and far more dangerous. The first sign came at 3:12 a.m. A sudden crash shattered the silence in Elijah Carter's home. A thunderclap of broken glass. He jolted awake in his chair, heart pounding, breath caught. The front window had exploded inward, scattering shards across the living room floor like jagged diamonds. A brick lay at the center, wrapped in duct tape and hatred. Scrawled across the side in thick, angry black ink were 5 chilling words. Leave it alone, old man. Elijah stood slowly, trembling, not from fear but from fury. His eyes swept over the mess, the blood trickling from a shallow cut on his palm. They'd come for his dignity now, just as they had come for his land. But he wasn't backing down. Not after everything Ruth had done, not after the documents she'd preserved, not after the truth had started to burn its way through the lies. The next attack came 2 days later, Sunday morning. The sky was clear, the air crisp. Elijah had just passed the gate to First Baptist Church, his sanctuary, his routine, his place of peace, when 2 men stepped out from behind a dumpster. He didn't recognize them. He didn't have time to. A fist landed in his side. Another crashed into his face. He stumbled backward, ribs cracking, blood filling his mouth. He collapsed near the sidewalk, one hand clawing toward the iron gate, trying to call for help. The last thing he heard before they ran was a voice whispering close to his ear. You keep digging, and we'll bury you next. He was found minutes later by Sister Thompson, who screamed for help as she knelt beside his bloodied body. Paramedics arrived quickly. The scene was cordoned off, but the message had already been delivered loud and clear. Elijah Carter had become dangerous, and they were going to silence him. Andre received the envelope that same afternoon. No return address, no postmark. Just his name, handwritten in all caps. Inside, a single photograph, him standing outside the courthouse next to Maya Henderson, the reporter who'd published the leaked documents. On the back, a note written in red ink. You're making powerful enemies. Last chance. Andre's hands shook. He looked up from the picture, then back down. This wasn't a warning. It was a declaration of war. He grabbed his keys and rushed out the door, heading straight for the hospital. Elijah had been admitted with 2 broken ribs, a fractured cheekbone, and severe blood loss. The doctors said he was stable, but they didn't sound confident. Andre paced the hallway like a soldier trapped in a siege, heart hammering against his chest, rage simmering beneath his skin. Finally, a nurse motioned for him. Room 217. He stepped inside quietly. The hospital room was dimly lit, the only sound the rhythmic beep of machines and the quiet hum of the IV. Elijah looked smaller than usual, wrapped in layers of white linen, but his eyes, those sharp, fire-fed eyes, were awake, watching, waiting. Andre moved to his side. He opened his mouth to speak, but Elijah raised a trembling hand. "Don't say anything yet," he rasped. His voice was weak, dry, but there was no mistaking the steel beneath it. "Just listen." Andre nodded, swallowing the knot in his throat. "I've lived long enough to know what this is," Elijah whispered. "They're not just trying to scare us. They're trying to erase us." He coughed, blood in the corner of his lips, and Andre reached for a tissue, but Elijah shook his head. "No time for that," he muttered. "Listen to me, boy. If I don't make it to the end of this, if I don't live to see those bastards fall, you finish it. You hear me?" Andre's voice cracked. "Don't say that. You're not—" "You finish it," Elijah said, louder now, eyes burning into his grandson's. "Not just for me, for your grandmother, for every family they stole from. You finish it." Andre blinked away the tears. "I will," he said. "I swear to you, I will." Elijah nodded, his breathing shallow now. Ruth knew this would get ugly. That's why she made copies. That's why she kept everything so organized, so you'd have something to fight with. She gave us the map. Now you carry the torch. Andre leaned in, gripping his grandfather's hand. "You're going to walk out of this hospital," he said, voice thick. "You're going to see them exposed. You're going to see them answer for what they did." Elijah smiled faintly. "And if I don't," he whispered, "you make sure someone does." The machines beeped. The lights flickered faintly. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that within the four walls of that hospital room, a generational promise was being passed like a sacred weapon. Andre Carter left the hospital the following evening, shoulders tight with tension, mind spinning with the weight of what he had promised Elijah. The hallway lights flickered overhead, casting long, restless shadows across the polished floor. His grandfather was stable, but barely. The doctors had warned him. Any new complication could turn critical. And so Andre carried more than just his laptop bag. He carried Elijah's unspoken fears, Ruth's careful legacy, and the knowledge that powerful enemies were tightening their grip. He drove through city traffic, hands clenched on the steering wheel. Anonymous threats still haunted him. Those notes, that photo, all the hateful graffiti. The vow he'd made to Elijah replayed in his head like a mantra. "You finish it if I can't." By the time he pulled up to his cramped studio apartment, the sun had dipped below the rooftops, painting the sky a bruised purple. Every step felt heavier than the last. There was a figure waiting by his front door, a tall man in a sleek charcoal suit, arms folded, posture annoyingly casual. As Andre approached, the man pivoted to face him, a thin smile stretching across an impeccably groomed face. "Mr. Carter, correct?" the man asked, voice velvet smooth. Andre tensed. "Who's asking?" The man extended a business card. "Marcus Wellstone, Esquire, Corporate Counsel, Kingsland Development." The slick brand logo glinted beneath the street lamp. "I represent certain interests," Marcus said in that calm, practiced tone lawyers use when they're about to negotiate the sale of a soul. "May I come in? Or shall we speak out here in the cold?" Andre swallowed. His instincts screamed danger, but curiosity and the pressing need to appear unafraid took hold. "Fine," he muttered, unlocking the door. "Make it quick." Inside, the apartment was cramped. A small living area, kitchenette, a single worn couch, and a desk piled with old textbooks. The overhead bulb buzzed. Andre flicked it on and gestured for Marcus to sit, but the man chose to stand, as though reluctant to touch anything not sanitized by wealth. "All right." Andre dropped his laptop bag on the couch. "What do you want?" Marcus took a moment to examine the space. His gaze brushed over the clutter, code printouts, half-eaten takeout, an open binder of Ruth's notes, and returned to Andre, eyes gleaming with something akin to amusement. "I'm aware you and your grandfather have Complicated issues with my clients. Andre stiffened. Your clients are thieves who nearly killed him. Marcus shrugged, expression blank. That's an allegation. The courts will decide. He paused, then cleared his throat. However, we at Kingsland Development pride ourselves on forward-thinking solutions. We prefer to settle disputes amicably when possible. Andre let out a short, bitter laugh. Amicably? They just put my grandfather in the hospital. Allegedly, Marcus corrected gently, no formal charges have been filed. Could be random violence, yes? Andre's hands clenched into fists. He wanted to shout, wanted to pick up the nearest object and fling it at the polished face of this corporate vulture. But he forced himself to breathe in and out, remembering Elijah's condition. Stay calm. Stay strategic. Marcus, as though sensing the tension, pulled a folded paper from his suit jacket. Let's cut to the chase, he said, stepping forward. I have an offer for you. He set the paper on the tiny coffee table. Andre eyed it warily. A job contract, Marcus explained, smoothing the edges. We're expanding our tech department. A position has opened that you would be uniquely suited for. Your skill set, your understanding of data encryption, your knowledge of local property records, perfect for a new compliance initiative. Starting salary, $200,000 a year, plus bonuses. He paused, then laid down another sheet. And of course, a signing bonus of the same amount, $200,000, paid immediately upon acceptance. Andre's throat felt dry. That was more money than he could have imagined. Enough to buy his grandfather the best medical care. Enough to start fresh somewhere else, far from the nightmare that had overtaken them. Marcus watched him carefully. We understand your loyalty to your family. However, it's important to note that certain documents may no longer be relevant if you take this job, specifically the Carter family diaries, tax files, or anything that might conflict with your new role. His voice remained calm, but the implication was explosive. You'd simply hand them over to our legal team. We'd ensure everything remains confidential. For a moment, the world slowed. Andre's heart hammered, sweat beating at the back of his neck. He saw Elijah in that hospital bed, tubes snaking around him, bruises darkening his aged skin. He pictured Ruth's careful handwriting, her last words, her systematic evidence of theft, corruption, heartbreak. Could he really betray them both for a paycheck? Could he bury the truth just to guarantee he wouldn't be next on the hit list? He swallowed hard. And if I refuse? Marcus gave him that thin, professional smile. That would be regrettable. We can't guarantee any further consideration for your safety or well-being. Certain associates might interpret your refusal as aggression. Andre shuddered. The threat was as subtle as a bullet. Marcus extended a pen, gold-tipped, reflective of greed. You're a smart man, Mr. Carter. There's no future in fighting battles you can't win. Your grandfather is old, his health failing. Don't let this crusade kill both of you. The pen gleamed in the light. Andre stared at it, mind swirling with the weight of everything. He pictured the hospital monitors beeping. He remembered the photograph he'd received with the red ink warning. He thought about the boarded-up window at Elijah's house and the broken glass that had nearly ended them. Maybe this is the only way out, a small voice in his head whispered. Maybe you can't save him any other way. He took the pen. Marcus exhaled in relief, or triumph, or both. He turned the contract around, pointing to a dotted line. Sign here, then we'll handle the rest. Andre's hand shook as he brought the pen closer to the paper. 200,000, a job that could secure your future. The end of all these threats. Elijah safe, maybe. He told himself that if he took the deal, he could still look after his grandfather. He could ensure Elijah never worried about medical bills again. And what about Ruth's documents? The diaries? Is that so important compared to his life? His grip tightened. The pen hovered above the line. He closed his eyes, took a breath. Ruth had left him a note somewhere in the final pages. He hadn't read it all yet. He'd only skimmed half of it, but the last line had seared itself into his brain. She'd written it as if she knew his exact dilemma. If you ever wonder whether truth is worth it, remember, silence never saved anyone. The words flared in his memory, cutting through the haze of fear and desperation. He remembered Ruth in her final days, hunched over that battered desk, copying document after document, too sick to stand for more than a few minutes at a time, but refusing to give up. Her spirit had been unstoppable. She'd fought for their land, their dignity, their story, and now he was about to sign it all away for a neat bribe. His eyes opened. The contract stared back at him, blank and hungry. The pen fell from his fingers. He looked at Marcus. Something in Andre's face must have changed, because the attorney's smug certainty began to waver. "I'm sorry," Andre said, voice low, shaking, "but I'm not for sale." Marcus's posture stiffened. "Mr. Carter, don't be hasty. This is your best chance." Andre snatched the papers from the table. Before Marcus could react, Andre tore them in half, then again, until the contract lay in strips at his feet. Marcus's face went blank. His jaw tensed. "That was unwise," he said softly. Andre could barely hear him over the roar in his ears. He grabbed his lighter from the desk drawer, flicked the flame alive. Then methodically, he set one of the torn pieces alight. The paper curled, blackened, and turned to ash. One by one, he burned every last shred, dropping them into a trash bin. The smell of scorched ink and crisped edges filled the room. Marcus stared, stunned. "You're making a terrible mistake," he snapped, voice turning brittle. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Andre's throat felt raw. "I've chosen my family." The lawyer's eyes hardened. "Then you've chosen the losing side." He straightened his lapels, regaining that corporate composure. "I'll let my superiors know your decision. You realize we can't protect you now?" Andre let out a harsh laugh. "You never planned to protect me, only to buy my silence." Marcus took a step toward the door. "Your funeral," he spat, each syllable dripping with contempt. He pulled the door open. "They'll come for you next." Andre crossed his arms over his chest. "Let them." Marcus stormed out into the night, the echo of his footsteps fading down the hallway. Silence filled the apartment. The burnt scraps of the contract smoldered in the trash bin, thin tendrils of smoke curling toward the ceiling. Andre let out a trembling breath. He sank onto the couch, adrenaline crashing through him like a wave, leaving him exhausted, shaky, terrified. That could have been the end of his problems. Instead, he'd possibly made them worse. But the alternative, selling out Elijah's entire legacy, felt unthinkable. He reached for Ruth's notebook. He opened to the final page, where her handwriting had grown weaker, but no less resolute. He found the line that had saved him, the one that burned through his mind whenever he thought about giving in. "If you ever wonder whether truth is worth it, remember, silence never saved anyone." He ran his fingers over the words, imagining her voice, steady and unyielding, guiding him through the darkness. Then he flipped backward, scanning more of her notes. She documented every meeting, every phone call, every attempt by men like Marcus to coerce them into selling out. This was never about just one family, Ruth had written. This is a pattern, a system that robs people of more than just property. It steals their heritage, their future, their name. Andre could almost feel her presence beside him, urging him onward. The hush money might have saved his bank account, but it would have damned everything else. His conscience, his family's honor, the very memory of Ruth's dying days spent hunched over a desk, fighting for a cause that should have been won generations ago. He thought about Elijah, lying in a hospital bed, battered and bruised, but still holding on to hope. "If I do not live to see justice, you finish it for me, for Ruth." The vow rang through his mind like a bell. He just refused a deal that most people in his position would have grabbed without a second thought. Now he had no illusions about the road ahead. The enemy wouldn't just go away because he'd burned a contract. They'd come for him with everything they had. The phone calls would get nastier, the visits more dangerous, the shadows thicker. Yet in that uncertain darkness, a grim determination solidified in his chest. He would not let them win, not while he still had breath. The fight for justice is just beginning. More shocking twists are ahead. Don't miss a moment. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay with us. Thank you for standing for truth and justice. Where are you watching from? Let us know. Andre spent 3 sleepless nights combing through the county courthouse's digital archives, eyes red from the glow of his laptop screen. He compared thousands of scanned case files, property deeds, and court orders, searching for any trace of duplication, any inconsistency that would betray a hidden hand. Coffee cups and energy drinks piled up around him like trophies from a desperate hunt. Finally, just before dawn on the fourth day, he found it. A blurred signature scrawled on 3 separate deeds, all supposedly executed by Elijah Carter, but dating months apart. The handwriting looked eerily similar, down to each crooked letter and flourish. Yet no one had questioned the coincidence, and no official had bothered to confirm its authenticity. His heart pounded as he uncovered more. Entire sets of documents that listed Elijah's name, but bore dates that didn't match tax receipts or property surveys. Some pages were digitally stamped as received the same day they were allegedly mailed, which should have been impossible. He felt a surge of triumph, tempered by cold fury. They had forged Elijah's signature, rigged the data, and manipulated the official record to justify stealing his family's land. The same men who had threatened his grandfather and nearly cost him his life were orchestrating a grand scheme under the guise of legal procedure. The next morning, Andre marched into the office of a local civil rights attorney who had offered to help. Cradled under his arm was a thick sheaf of printouts containing every discrepancy he had unearthed. He poured it all onto the lawyer's cluttered desk. The attorney, a woman named Rosalind Drake, skimmed the pages, then shot him a startled, almost fearful glance. "I've seen some shady filings before," she said, "but this is a whole new level. If this is real, we can blow their case wide open." By noon, they had filed a new lawsuit against Kingsland Development and the local officials complicit in the fiasco. Andre felt his pulse surge with hope. Surely, armed with clear evidence of forgery, they would force the court to reopen Elijah's claim. He pictured the judge pounding his gavel, outraged at the injustice, ordering an immediate injunction to return the land to its rightful owner. He couldn't have been more wrong. Just 3 days after submitting the new complaint, they were summoned to the same courthouse, the same imposing marble corridors that seemed designed to make ordinary people feel small. In a cramped hearing room, the company's lawyers swarmed like hornets, armed with slick presentations, and introduced a barrage of technical objections. They claimed the signatures were simply digital reproductions, that the dates were clerical errors, and that the entire matter was immaterial. When Andre tried to explain the significance of the forensic data, the judge waved a dismissive hand. "We're here to assess the legality of the initial ruling," he said, "not to litigate alleged digital anomalies." He didn't so much as glance at the exhibits Andre had painstakingly compiled. Rosalind argued valiantly, her voice echoing in the small chamber. "Your Honor, these documents show a deliberate attempt to fabricate evidence. If you look at pages 12 through 18, you'll see—" "I've seen enough," the judge snapped, cutting her off. "Case dismissed." Andre felt the floor tilt beneath him, as if the courthouse itself were rejecting the truth. The bailiff barked for everyone to clear the room. Kingsland's lawyers smirked, flashing condescending glances at Andre and Rosalind. She rested a comforting hand on his shoulder, but he barely felt it. They had come so close only to be swatted aside as if their evidence was a trifling inconvenience. Outside in the hallway, he found Elijah waiting, leaning on a cane but standing tall. Bruises from his recent injuries still shadowed the old man's cheeks. His gaze flicked between Andre's taut expression and Rosalind's bowed head. "They threw it out again, didn't they?" Andre nodded. The rage boiled inside him. "They didn't even read the pages," he said through clenched teeth. "It's like they decided before we walked in." Elijah breathed deeply, pushing back the fury threatening to consume him. He closed his eyes for a moment, then reached into the canvas bag at his side. "I didn't come here to beg," he whispered. "I came to give them something they can't ignore." Rosalind started to speak, but Elijah shook his head. Slowly he turned and strode back into the courtroom. Andre and Rosalind exchanged startled looks, then followed. A clerk sputtered, "Sir, the hearing is over." But Elijah didn't stop. He walked right up to the judge's bench, ignoring the outraged hisses from the bailiff. In his hand was Ruth's diary, her final weapon, the painstaking record of every suspicious call, every forged signature, every heartbreak. He placed it gently before the judge, laying it down like an offering on an altar. The judge opened his mouth to protest, but Elijah fixed him with a stare. His voice, though soft, carried the weight of generations wronged. "You can ignore me," he said, each word resonating like a thunderclap in the hush. "But you can't ignore her." For a moment, the room felt as still as a graveyard. The gallery had nearly emptied, but a few onlookers craned their necks, expecting the judge to explode. Kingsland's attorneys frowned, uncertain how to spin this. Elijah tapped the cover of the diary with a trembling finger. "That's my wife's handwriting. She wrote down everything they did, every lie they told, every time they tried to break our spirit." His voice tightened. "She died fighting to protect our land, and I promised her I'd finish what she started." The judge recovered from his shock, lips pressed into a thin line. "Sir," he said sternly, "this hearing is concluded. You are out of order." "I'm out of options." Elijah's voice rose, but there was no desperation in it, only raw determination. "You refused our evidence. You refused to hear our case. This diary is the truth you keep pretending doesn't exist." He took a step back, leaning on his cane. "I won't beg for your mercy, because I don't need it. I need justice." Andre, watching from the side, felt tears sting his eyes. The entire world seemed to narrow in that instant, focusing on the old man and the silent ledger of his wife's final days. The judge's gavel hovered, uncertain. The tension was so thick it could have crushed bones. One of Kingsland's lawyers cleared his throat, sputtering, "This is highly irregular." "That's enough," the judge snapped, voice shaking with anger or perhaps guilt. He gestured at the bailiff. "Remove Mr. Carter." The bailiff stepped forward, but so did Andre. He placed a hand on his grandfather's shoulder, ready to lead him away peacefully, ensuring the old man wouldn't be harmed again. Elijah let his grandson guide him. Before they exited, Elijah turned one last time. "This isn't over," he said, voice resonating off the walls. "You can dismiss the papers, bury our evidence, but you'll never bury Ruth's words." Then the doors slammed shut behind them, leaving a stricken judge staring at the blue-bound journal on his bench. And for the first time in years, the grand machinery of injustice wavered, because in that final stand, Elijah Carter refused to be erased. Within hours of Elijah Carter's defiant stand in that courthouse, word of his struggle blazed across social media like a wildfire. A short video clip, captured by a spectator on a cell phone, showed Elijah carefully laying Ruth's diary on the judge's bench and declaring, in a voice thick with years of pain, that he would not be ignored. Within a day, that clip racked up hundreds of thousands of views. Strangers who had never heard the name Elijah Carter suddenly found themselves enthralled by the quiet conviction of an elderly man challenging a system that seemed determined to erase him. Tweets and posts referencing the Carter case flooded every platform, turning a local dispute into a national conversation. Community organizers began asking questions. Why had the courts refused to hear his evidence? How many other families had been displaced in similar ways? And what could the public do to help? News outlets picked up the story in rapid succession, featuring interviews with neighbors who spoke of suspicious tax notices and constant harassment. The more the story spread, the more people realized this was not just about one man's fight to keep his ancestral land. It was a lens into a larger corruption that had festered for far too long in the shadows. Calls for justice grew louder with each passing hour, forcing once indifferent officials to confront the possibility that Elijah's claims might be more than the ramblings of a powerless old man. Amid this online uproar, Elijah lay in a hospital bed, recovering from the injuries inflicted by the faceless thugs who had attacked him outside his church. Bruises marked his ribs, and his forehead bore a deep cut that required multiple stitches. Yet he refused to be silent. Whenever reporters reached out, he answered their calls from his room, voice soft but steady, urging them to read Ruth's diary if they wanted the full story. And read they did. Scans of Ruth's handwritten notes circulated on Facebook and Twitter. Pages where she meticulously documented suspicious changes in property taxes, fraudulent court filings, and the quiet exodus of elderly Black homeowners from historically significant neighborhoods. Each page of her diary read like a slow-burn exposé, a testament to her unwavering devotion to the truth. Soon, older residents from cities across the country began sharing their own experiences under the hashtag #NotJustElijah. Stories poured in of grandparents who had lost their homes overnight, of forged signatures, of a legal system that seemed designed to marginalize those without money or influence. In nursing homes and community centers, people recognized themselves in Elijah's plight. He was not just an isolated voice, he was the catalyst for an entire generation that had been robbed of security and dignity. Spurred by Elijah's courage, families dug through old records, scanning deeds, notarized statements, and any fragment of proof they could find, hoping to preserve them before these precious documents could vanish like so many others had. On the 5th day after the video went viral, Andre decided to host a digital workshop from Elijah's hospital room. Using his laptop and a hastily assembled streaming setup, he showed viewers how to back up legal paperwork in encrypted online drives. He explained the basics of scanning documents and storing them safely in multiple places, so no single entity could destroy the evidence. Though the broadcast was rough around the edges, tens of thousands tuned in, many of them elderly or caring for elderly relatives who had faced eerily similar battles. Comments flooded the live chat. "My grandmother lost her house in '98 the same way. We need to do this in Chicago. How can I help my aunt who got an eviction notice?" For Andre, each message was both heartbreaking and invigorating. It proved Ruth's suspicions were valid. This was a widespread issue, not a solitary injustice. He told stories of how Ruth had spent her final days compiling records and scanning receipts, even as her health failed. He recounted Elijah's unwavering insistence that the truth must be made impossible to bury. By the time he ended the broadcast, Carter Diaries was trending nationwide, and he had a list of over 300 volunteers, tech-savvy retirees, nonprofit organizers, college students, ready to help digitize the stories of vulnerable homeowners. Slowly but surely, they were building a grassroots firewall against the forces that had tried so hard to operate in darkness. In tandem with this surge of public awareness, a local investigative journalist named Maya Henderson published an extensive article tracing the lineage of Elijah's land and cross-referencing it with the documentation in Ruth's diary. She exposed how the same notary appeared across dozens of questionable transfers, how each judge that dismissed claims had ties to well-funded political campaigns from real estate conglomerates, and how entire blocks of historically black neighborhoods had been transformed almost overnight into shiny developments for wealthier, often white newcomers. The piece landed like a bombshell, prompting elected officials to issue statements promising to look into the matter. Within days, national outlets picked up the story, multiplying its impact. Suddenly, talk show hosts were discussing systemic property theft, generational wealth, and how a frail but indomitable old man had forced the country to confront a hidden scandal. While some commentators accused Elijah of playing victim, the overwhelming majority sided with him. The transcripts of Ruth's diary painted a picture too vivid to dismiss. It listed phone calls, tax increments, and even the bank accounts funneling money to local bureaucrats. The question was no longer if corruption existed, only how deep it went. Calls for investigations became deafening. High-profile activists demanded immediate intervention. Elijah, still weak from his injuries, found himself the reluctant face of a movement that had simmered beneath the surface for decades. Meanwhile, Andre scrambled to keep up with the influx of new data, emails from whistleblowers, and requests for interviews from journalists. Then came the news that the Federal Bureau of Investigation had officially opened a file on these suspicious property transfers. Rumors circulated online first, but a press release confirmed it. The FBI was stepping in. Their initial findings revealed a staggering 213 cases where documentation appeared tampered with, signatures did not match, or entire court proceedings seemed to vanish from official records. Agents requested interviews with Elijah and Andre, seeking copies of Ruth's diary to cross-check with their own data. Andre felt a heady mix of relief and anxiety at the news. Yes, it was progress to see federal agents acknowledging the wrongdoing, but it also meant stepping onto a higher-stakes battlefield. The corporate interests behind the stolen properties were not about to surrender quietly. Threatening letters became more specific. Elijah's hospital room received anonymous calls at odd hours, the caller breathing heavily before hanging up. Andre found suspicious cars idling outside his apartment at night. Yet with each new risk, their circle of supporters grew. Retired judges volunteered pro bono to review questionable deeds. Lawyers from different states formed ad hoc committees to share strategies for defending homeowners. Police officers, tired of turning a blind eye, began leaking internal memos about how local precincts were instructed to prioritize developer security over longtime residents. The tide had turned, and for once, those who had manipulated the system no longer operated invisibly behind sealed files and complicated legal jargon. The FBI's involvement brought them into the light. Across the country, older Black Americans, many of whom had endured similar attempts to strip them of property, began organizing under a new banner, the Land Justice Alliance. It started with small gatherings in church basements and community centers, places where, just like Elijah's neighborhood, people had once felt powerless. At these meetings, families swapped stories of intimidation, backdated tax bills, and unscrupulous lawyers who promised easy solutions but delivered only ruin. Photocopies of Ruth's diary circulated as a symbol of unbreakable resistance. Some activists had T-shirts printed with Elijah's image and the words "We stand with Carter." Others used the hashtag #LandJusticeNow to connect with supporters nationwide. Soon, protest marches snaked through the streets of major cities, each led by elders who refused to be silenced by age or fear. Andre watched, amazed, as thousands of people carried signs demanding an end to predatory development practices. When reporters interviewed participants, they often cited Elijah's dignity and Ruth's diligence as their inspiration. In Seattle, a group of octogenarians staged a sit-in at a city planning office, brandishing their property deeds. In Atlanta, a rally of senior citizens and college students demanded the resignation of local officials linked to shady land deals. Word of these demonstrations traveled far, reaching even foreign media outlets, who marveled at how one family's fight had ignited a movement. The system that had relied on secrecy and scattered efforts to maintain its power now faced a united front, each new voice echoing Ruth's unwavering call for accountability. Under mounting pressure, multiple state attorneys general announced parallel investigations. Subpoenas flew, demanding corporate emails, internal memos, and detailed financial records from the real estate developers implicated in the scandal. Some smaller fish flipped, turning state's evidence. They admitted to forging documents, paying off judges, or funneling money into political campaigns. With each confession, the web of corruption stretched wider, implicating higher-ups who had long believed themselves untouchable. Meanwhile, Elijah kept receiving visitors at the hospital, supporters, journalists, even a few city officials who professed shock at the scale of the injustice. Despite his bandaged ribs and constant fatigue, Elijah would greet them with calm courtesy, and sometimes, if they asked politely, he would let them read a page or two from Ruth's diary. That battered old notebook had become more than a log of fraudulent paperwork. It was the soul of a movement. People saw in Ruth's careful penmanship a testament to how even one dying woman's voice could rattle the pillars of power. Each time Elijah described her dedication, a hush fell over the room, as if acknowledging the presence of something sacred. Andre, on his part, found himself juggling interviews, data management, and the newly formed committees that wanted him to speak at rallies. He discovered that many older individuals were terrified even to come forward, worried that big money interests would retaliate. He reminded them that safety lay in numbers. If everyone shared their files publicly, no single household could be singled out. The movement, he insisted, must be unstoppable. At last, the tipping point came when a national television segment profiled the Carters' fight. Anchored by a popular primetime host, the story aired decades-old photographs of Elijah's family standing on their farmland, then cut to footage of bulldozers leveling a row of nearby houses under what the developers called urban revitalization. The host's tone grew outraged, citing the FBI's discovery of 213 forged or tampered cases. A final shot lingered on a close-up of Ruth's diary, its pages darkened with her steady handwriting. A single line highlighted, "We will not be erased." Overnight, the Land Justice Alliance ballooned from a grassroots network to a force that no politician could ignore. Rallies flooded Washington, D.C., and entire city blocks filled with signs reading, "Return our land" and "Stop the steal. This time it's real." Congressional leaders began drafting new federal regulations to protect longtime homeowners, ensuring that property transfers underwent rigorous audits. Political candidates tried to ride the wave, promising to champion the cause. Though many families still awaited their day in court, a sense of hope, long absent, took root. The pressure on the courts intensified, with multiple judges stepping down amid investigations. As for Elijah, he remained the heart of the uprising. Even from his hospital bed, he spoke via video calls at rallies, urging people to keep pushing. "We're fighting for more than land," he would say. "We're fighting for our right to exist, to have a history, to pass that history on." The crowd always roared. As the weeks turned into months, the Land Justice Alliance solidified its structure, forming regional chapters and training volunteers to help homeowners protect their deeds. Andre spearheaded a tech initiative, teaching seniors how to scan and encrypt vital documents, demonstrating exactly how to utilize multiple cloud services for safe redundancy. Elijah's name became synonymous with persistence, and Ruth's diary was reprinted in full, minus private family details, as an enduring testament to the power of meticulous record-keeping. Universities assigned the story to law students, and civil rights professors pointed to this movement as a shining example of grassroots activism, triumphing over entrenched corruption. The FBI investigation continued at full throttle, resulting in multiple indictments against real estate moguls and complicit officials. Some local governments were forced to set up restitution funds for displaced families. Statutes of limitation were challenged and in some cases overturned when evidence of systematic fraud came to light. For Elijah Carter, the day he finally left the hospital was a triumph in itself. Leaning on Andre's arm, he stepped into the bright morning sun to find a crowd of neighbors and supporters waiting with cheers and applause. He still ached with every movement, but his spirit soared. In that moment, he realized they were no longer fighting alone. Ruth's diary had outgrown them. It had become the heartbeat of a national reckoning. Even as the road ahead promised more battles, he felt the unshakable certainty that truth, once freed, would never again be silenced. But just when they thought the battle was over, the system struck back, harder, dirtier, and more ruthless than ever. It happened at dawn. Andre Carter didn't even have time to put on his shoes before half a dozen agents burst into his apartment, flashing badges, barking commands. "Andre Carter, you are under arrest for unauthorized access of protected court data." He barely had a chance to blink before cold metal cuffs closed around his wrists. They tore through his apartment, grabbing his laptop, flash drives, notebooks, everything. It didn't matter that the information he'd accessed had exposed fraud, forged deeds, and rigged tax documents. All that mattered now was retaliation. Within minutes, he was dragged down the stairwell in front of stunned neighbors. One woman cried out, "That's Elijah's grandson." Another pulled out her phone, filming the scene that would go viral within the hour. The footage showed Andre silent, proud, and unbroken as agents shoved him into a black SUV and slammed the door. The news hit Elijah like a sledgehammer. Already fragile and recovering from weeks of stress, Elijah Carter collapsed in the middle of the community center while holding a photo of Ruth. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. Paramedics rushed in, and within moments, the 76-year-old was being rushed to the emergency room, barely conscious. The diagnosis: severe exhaustion, stress-induced heart arrhythmia. "He needs rest," the doctor told Andre's mother. "But I'm not sure he wants it. He keeps saying he has to be in court, that he made Ruth a promise." Outside the hospital, fury erupted. Word of Andre's arrest spread like wildfire across the city. Flyers went up, hashtags ignited. "Justice for Andre," "Stand with Elijah." By the end of the day, nearly 300 people gathered outside the courthouse. Some held signs with Ruth's photo. Others carried handwritten deeds to homes they feared would be taken next. "This isn't just about one man," a young protester told the media. "This is about all of us. They arrest the whistleblower while the criminals walk free? Not anymore." News vans rolled in. National coverage began. Major anchors quoted Elijah's courtroom speech, how he'd placed Ruth's diary in front of the judge and said, "You can ignore me, but you cannot ignore her." They aired clips of Andre helping seniors back up their documents, of Ruth's meticulous handwriting exposing the scheme no one wanted to talk about. The system had pushed too far. The people had had enough. 3 days after Andre's arrest, the tide shifted. In a federal court packed with journalists, community leaders, and civil rights attorneys, Judge Aileen Maddox, a no-nonsense federal magistrate with a reputation for integrity, presided over an emergency bail hearing. The prosecution claimed Andre had maliciously infiltrated protected databases, but Andre's lawyers presented something far more potent: truth. They showed that the files he accessed were public records deliberately mislabeled to hide fraudulent transfers. They revealed digital footprints, admin accounts tied to developers who had no legal right to court systems. The judge's face darkened as each piece was presented. "These charges," Judge Maddox declared, her gavel slamming down, "are not only baseless, but reek of institutional retaliation. Mr. Carter is hereby released, and a formal investigation into the original case and prior judicial conduct will commence immediately." The room erupted. Applause, shouts, tears. Andre stood frozen for a moment before walking over to his mother, then hugging Maya Henderson, the journalist who had never stopped writing. But one voice remained missing from the noise: Elijah Carter. Still recovering in the hospital, the news gave him strength. When nurses entered the next morning, they found him fully dressed, tie tight, Ruth's photo in hand. "I've got somewhere to be," he said with quiet defiance, "and I made her a promise." He entered the courtroom like a ghost of history, weathered, frail, but unshaken. His steps were slow, deliberate. In one hand, he held Ruth's diary. In the other, a folded American flag, once presented to his father, a World War II veteran who had purchased the very land at the heart of this fight. He made his way to the witness table, ignoring the cameras, the crowd, the whispers. "I was born on that land," he said, "and they tried to steal it with ink and lies." His voice wavered, but his gaze never did. "They forged signatures, rewrote laws, and told us we were the problem. But my wife wrote the truth, and her truth is still here. It outlived her, and it'll outlive this corruption." The silence that followed was suffocating. Judge Maddox leaned forward. "Mr. Carter, this court has reviewed the new evidence, and based on the findings, I am prepared to issue a ruling." She looked across the courtroom, eyes sharp as steel. "It is the judgment of this court that the original foreclosure and land seizure were unlawful, predicated on forged documents, and sanctioned by a judge now under federal investigation. The Carter family property will be returned in full. Furthermore, restitution will be made to all verified victims of similar fraudulent seizures. A federal task force will investigate these patterns, and all responsible parties, developers, clerks, officials, will be held to account." The courtroom exploded. Cheers erupted. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment. Andre wept openly in the gallery. A woman in the back fell to her knees, hands lifted in prayer. Maya couldn't type fast enough. "And Elijah?" He didn't speak. He simply placed Ruth's photo on the table, faced the judge, and nodded. It wasn't triumph. It was peace. Outside, the crowd waited. When Elijah exited, he was met with a roar of applause. Elderly residents lined the steps, holding up their own deeds. Young activists linked arms, singing. A little girl held a sign that read, "Ruth was right." Andre joined his grandfather at the top of the steps. "She'd be proud," he said quietly. Elijah smiled faintly, looking at the city, the sky, the sea of faces below. "She already was." The bulldozers came back, but this time, they weren't here to destroy. They were here to build. On the same plot of land once stolen through forged signatures and corrupt rulings, concrete was poured with purpose, wood cut with care, and steel beams lifted under the hands of workers from every corner of the community. Where injustice once cast its shadow, justice was now rising, brick by brick, beam by beam. And at the heart of it all stood a sign carved into rich mahogany, the Ruth Carter Justice Center. It stood as a monument, not just to a woman whose quiet brilliance had exposed an empire of corruption, but to an entire movement born from her ink-stained pages. It was more than a building. It was a promise, etched in sweat, sacrifice, and the unrelenting spirit of a family that refused to be erased. Inside, every inch was designed with purpose. The first room visitors encountered was the Ruth Carter Archives, a quiet, glass-encased sanctuary where her diaries were preserved like scripture. Pages yellowed with time but blazing with truth. Her handwriting, elegant, steady, lined the walls like gospel. If they won't hear us in court, we'll speak in ink. Children, scholars, and survivors alike passed through this room, some in silence, others in tears. Every line carried weight, every word mattered. Next came the Legal Advocacy Hall, where attorneys and law students volunteered to help vulnerable residents navigate property laws, check deeds, and challenge suspicious notices. Walls were covered in maps, red pins marking neighborhoods once targeted by fraudulent foreclosures. Green pins now bloomed where restitution had been secured, and new ones were added each week. But the heartbeat of the center pulsed from a room few had expected, the Digital Empowerment Lab. Rows of computers filled the space, each station manned by seniors hunched over keyboards, guided patiently by young volunteers. Overhead, screens projected live lessons taught by none other than Andre Carter, now the executive director of the center. Dressed simply in slacks and a collared shirt, he spoke with calm authority. "This," he said, gesturing to the screen displaying a colorful software interface, "is the tool we built together. It scans public records, flags suspicious transfers, and alerts residents before the fraud happens." He turned to a room full of elderly homeowners. "No more stolen deeds. No more forged signatures. We're building firewalls around your legacy, and we're doing it in Grandma Ruth's name." Applause broke out, genuine, thunderous, lasting. The software, aptly named Ruth, Real-Time Urban Title Hub, had already helped reverse over 40 property seizures in nearby counties. And now Andre was working with the Department of Housing to expand it nationwide. But outside, beyond the headlines and awards, the quiet soul of the center still rested in a single chair. It was just after 5 p.m. when the day's bustle died down. The sun began to set, painting long golden streaks across the front porch of the center, where Elijah Carter sat in his rocking chair. His frame was thin, weathered by time, but there was strength still in his shoulders and fire in his eyes. A group of neighborhood children gathered around him, sprawled out on the steps, some cross-legged, others resting on their elbows. "Tell us the story again, Mr. Elijah," one boy said. Elijah smiled, slow and warm. He held a worn photograph of Ruth in one hand and tapped it gently. "My wife," he began, "used to say something real simple. She said truth is like a seed. Bury it in darkness, hide it under lies, push it down with concrete and steel. Doesn't matter." He leaned forward. "It still grows." The children were rapt. No one moved. No one blinked. "She wrote everything down. Every crooked deal. Every falsified tax bill. Every time they tried to scare us silent. And even when cancer took her breath, it didn't take her voice. Her words lived on. Right there." He pointed toward the building behind him. "That diary?" one girl whispered. "That diary changed everything," Elijah said, voice thick with reverence. "And now look at you, all sitting here safe, proud on land we nearly lost, on land we reclaimed. With truth, a breeze stirred. Wind chimes on the porch tinkled softly. One of the children looked up. "Do you miss her?" Elijah didn't answer right away. He looked at Ruth's photo, at her smile, the same smile that had carried him through decades of hardship, the same smile that had fueled his final stand in that courtroom. "Every day," he said finally, "but she's still here." He nodded toward the center. "She's in every line of code," Andre writes, "in every page in that archive, in every neighbor who walks through those doors knowing their story matters, and in each of you." The children leaned in. He leaned back, rocking, slow, steady, content. Inside, the lights of the center flickered on. From the second floor, Andre stood at the window, watching his grandfather surrounded by laughter and life. He had seen Elijah at his lowest, hospitalized, broken, nearly lost. And now here he was, restored not by vengeance, but by legacy. Andre turned back to his office, sat down at his desk, and opened Ruth's scanned diary on his computer. At the very end was a note, written in trembling ink, addressed not to a judge or attorney, but to him. "Andre, if the day comes when the world tells you to walk away from the truth, Remember, it was never supposed to be easy, but it will always be worth it. He closed the screen with mist in his eyes. Outside, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, bathing the entire Ruth Carter Justice Center in amber light. Elijah stood from his chair, joints protesting but heart light. He stepped slowly inside, walked down the hall lined with her words, and paused before the wall where her photograph hung, a larger-than-life portrait, eyes full of fire, wisdom, and defiance. He looked up at her, whispered, "We did it, baby." And for the first time in a long, long time, he smiled. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference. Arrogant rookie officer challenges a black judge's authority. What happens next stuns everyone. Every Thursday at 12:30 p.m., Darnell Washington stood outside Morris Convenience on Marshall and 4th, waiting for his sister Michelle to finish her shift at the nearby dental clinic. It was their weekly ritual, a peaceful lunch break in the middle of their busy lives. A police cruiser pulled up with a quick jerk, wheels spitting dust against the curb. Officer Savannah Mitchell stepped out, her boots clicking with mechanical certainty. Her eyes locked on Darnell. Her posture screamed authority, but her gaze carried something colder, like she'd already made up her mind. "Sir," she called, hand resting near her belt, "I need to see some identification." Darnell looked up, confused but polite. "Excuse me? There's been a report of suspicious activity in the area. I need to see your ID." Her tone was clipped, rehearsed, and unyielding. Suspicious activity? Here? Darnell hesitated, then reached into his back pocket slowly, deliberately. "Sure," he said calmly, "but I'm just waiting for my sister. She works right there." He gestured to the dental clinic. "We meet here every Thursday." "I didn't ask for your schedule," Savannah snapped, taking a step closer. "I asked for your ID." Darnell handed over his license, offering a small, peacekeeping smile. "Everything okay, officer?" But she wasn't listening. Her eyes were scanning the ID like it held a hidden threat. Then, without warning, she lifted her radio. "Unit 247 requesting backup. Possible non-compliant subject. Standing by." Darnell blinked. "Wait, non-compliant? I gave you my ID." She didn't respond. Instead, she ordered, "Step away from the storefront." "I'm not even," he began, but she was already advancing. "Hands where I can see them." "What?" Darnell's voice rose slightly. "I'm cooperating." People on the sidewalk started to slow down. Some stopped. A few instinctively pulled out their phones. Something didn't feel right. The man wasn't yelling. He wasn't resisting. He looked confused. And the officer's tone? It was escalating faster than the situation demanded. "I'm telling you again," Savannah barked, now inches away. "Hands where I can see them, or I will detain you." Darnell raised his hands, stunned. "I'm not doing anything. I'm literally just waiting for someone." Behind the clinic window, Michelle had just clocked out. She spotted the flashing patrol lights through the blinds, then saw the unmistakable silhouette of her brother standing frozen, hands raised. Panic surged through her. She sprinted out the side door, but it was too late. In one swift motion, Savannah turned Darnell around and shoved him against the brick wall. The slap of metal echoed as she snapped handcuffs around his wrists. "You're being detained for suspicious behavior and potential resistance." "What?" Darnell shouted. "This is insane. I did nothing." "Back away," Savannah barked at a bystander who stepped too close with a camera phone. "Do not interfere with an active arrest." Michelle reached the scene just as Darnell was being pulled toward the cruiser. "That's my brother," she screamed. "What are you doing? He didn't do anything. We meet here every week." But Savannah didn't acknowledge her. Darnell was shoved into the back seat of the cruiser. The door slammed with a brutal finality. His face was pale, lips parted, eyes flicking from stranger to stranger, silently begging someone to explain what had just happened. He looked like a man who'd stepped into a nightmare. No aggression, no resistance, just raw, stunned confusion. The crowd had grown now 10, maybe 15 people. Several were recording. One woman shouted, "He didn't do anything. You can't just arrest someone for standing." Michelle pounded her fists on the window. Darnell, I'm calling a lawyer. Hang on. But Darnell barely heard her. The cruiser began pulling away. And in that moment, something cracked in the air. Something invisible, but heavy. The kind of crack that splits belief systems, that breaks illusions of safety. Darnell, a man who paid taxes, obeyed laws, wore button-downs, and kept receipts, had just learned a cruel truth. Sometimes none of it matters. Because to Officer Savannah Mitchell, he hadn't looked like a brother waiting for lunch. He looked like a threat, and that, in her eyes, was enough. While Darnell sat in a holding cell trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong, back at the precinct, Officer Savannah Mitchell was already rewriting the truth one keystroke at a time. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Officer Savannah Mitchell sat behind her desk in the precinct's cramped report room, her fingers dancing over the keyboard with clinical precision. Her uniform was spotless, her posture upright, her face unreadable except for the faint smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. The memory of the arrest still played fresh in her mind like a highlight reel. The man's stunned expression, his stammering protests, the gleam of the cuffs as they clicked shut. She didn't see an innocent man being humiliated. She saw a win. Her first solo arrest, neatly executed and easily justified with the right narrative. She began typing the report with confidence, choosing her words carefully. Subject appeared agitated, failed to comply with verbal commands, reached into pocket despite instruction to remain still. Subject resisted detainment and displayed erratic behavior. Officer responded with necessary force to ensure public safety. She leaned back for a moment, reading over the paragraph, and smiled. It was polished, procedural, perfectly within the bounds of department protocol. A lie, yes, but a convincing one. She didn't mention that Darnell had calmly offered his ID. She didn't mention the video cameras or the crowd. She certainly didn't mention Michelle Washington screaming that he was her brother. All of that was noise, distractions. In Savannah's eyes, she had done exactly what a good cop was trained to do. Neutralize a threat before it escalated, even if that threat was entirely imagined. After submitting the report into the department system, Savannah made her way to the break room, where a few officers were gathered, sipping burnt coffee and sharing stories from their morning shifts. She strolled in with a swagger, her boots echoing confidently against the linoleum floor. Well, she said loudly, tossing her gloves onto the table. First solo arrest. Not bad for a Thursday. Sergeant Owens, a gruff man with 20 years on the force, glanced up from his cup. Already? What happened? Savannah didn't wait to be asked twice. She launched into her version of the story, how a suspicious male, loitering outside a convenience store, had ignored commands, how he became belligerent when asked for ID, how she had to step in before things got out of hand. Guy tried to talk back like he was some kind of lawyer, she said with a scoff. You know the type, cool shirt, tie. But the minute you give them an order, suddenly they're civil rights experts. A few chuckles rippled around the room. Handled it by the book, though, she added with just enough pride to make her intentions clear. Showed him how we do things in the city. She took a sip from the styrofoam cup someone had left behind and leaned casually against the counter. The room seemed relaxed, almost supportive, but not everyone was laughing. Across the room, Sergeant Thompson sat silently, his eyes fixed on her. He'd trained Savannah briefly during her probationary period. He knew she was ambitious. He also knew she had a dangerous blind spot, one that mistook dominance for justice. He didn't say a word, just stared, and she didn't notice. In the office next door, Lieutenant Chen stood at the window, watching the street below, but she was only half focused. She'd seen Savannah's body cam alert pop up in the system, one that should have included footage from the moment she exited her cruiser. Instead, the file was marked as pending upload. A common glitch, maybe, but these glitches were becoming too familiar, and they always seemed to happen at the most convenient moments. Chen walked over to her computer, pulled up Savannah's report, and read it line by line. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the phrases. Subject appeared agitated, non-compliant, erratic behavior. It was textbook language, the kind of phrasing drilled into rookies who wanted to cover their backs, the kind that, in the wrong hands, buried the truth beneath procedure. She closed the file and sighed. In the break room, Savannah was still basking in her fabricated glory. I mean, honestly, she said, you let them talk too long. They start thinking they're in charge. Sometimes you just gotta make it clear. Badge beats attitude every time. It was that sentence so casual, so smug that made Thompson finally speak. You sure about that, Mitchell? He said quietly. The room went still. Savannah turned, still smiling, but her eyes sharpened. Sure about what, Sarge? That your badge makes you right. She chuckled, trying to brush it off. I'm sure it makes me the one writing the report. And guess what? That's the only version anyone reads. Thompson stood slowly, picked up his coffee, and walked past her. But as he passed, he murmured just loud enough for her to hear. Until the cameras start talking. Savannah's smile twitched, just for a second, but no one else said anything. The other officers either looked away or pretended not to have heard. They didn't want trouble. They didn't want to question a fellow cop, especially a rookie who seemed to be rising fast, and so silence settled in, thick, complicit. While Officer Mitchell basked in her fabricated version of heroism, Darnell Washington was trapped in a far harsher reality, cold, forgotten, and marked as a criminal for doing absolutely nothing wrong. The cell was cold, the air dry, and the silence so loud it echoed inside Darnell Washington's skull like a slow, relentless drumbeat. Time had lost meaning. His watch had been taken, his phone confiscated, his name now logged in the city's system alongside petty thieves and violent offenders. No charges had been filed, yet he'd been fingerprinted, photographed, processed like a criminal. No explanation, no apology, just a concrete bench, a flickering fluorescent light, and the choking weight of disbelief. He replayed it all over and over again, waiting for Michelle, handing over his ID, getting cussed at, slammed into the wall, the cuffs, the cameras, the shouting, the humiliation, and now this, a night spent in custody for a crime that didn't exist. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't resisted. He hadn't even raised his voice. And yet the arrest report painted him as belligerent, evasive, possibly dangerous. That single document, crafted with surgical lies, was now a shadow cast over his entire life. Across town, Michelle Washington sat in the corner of her apartment, hands trembling around a mug of untouched tea. Her brother wasn't answering calls, of course not. They'd taken his phone. No updates from the precinct, just stonewalling. She'd watched him be dragged into that patrol car like some threat to public safety when all he'd done was check his phone and wait for her. The guilt gnawed at her ribs like hunger. She was the reason he'd been there. She was the one who'd been late. By 3 a.m., she made the call that would change everything. Marcus Williams, came the groggy but firm voice on the other end. Mr. Williams, I need your help. It's my brother. They arrested him, and he didn't do anything. Please, you have to help. Williams had heard this tone before, desperation laced with disbelief. He asked for details, took notes, then said something Michelle didn't expect. This won't be easy. He didn't do anything, she repeated, as if that were enough. I know, Williams said, but justice doesn't come when it should. It comes when you refuse to stop chasing it. That morning, when Darnell was finally released without explanation, his clothes were wrinkled, his briefcase dented, and his reputation already bleeding. No formal charges, but the damage had begun. By 9 a.m., his supervisor at the accounting firm had already left a voicemail. Hey, Darnell, we saw something on social media. Not sure what happened, but we need to place you on administrative leave while HR reviews the situation. Hope everything's okay. Social media. The videos had gone viral overnight. One showed the moment he was cuffed. Another caught his calm response seconds before the arrest. But the comments were split. Some believed he was just another man unfairly targeted. Others defended the officer, claiming, "We don't know what happened before the video started." Truth didn't matter. Perception had already gone to trial. At Marcus Williams' office later that afternoon, Darnell sat across from the civil rights attorney, exhausted, defeated, and barely holding it together. I did everything right, he muttered. I stayed calm. I gave her my ID. I didn't touch her. I didn't yell. I believe you, Williams said quietly, sliding a legal pad across the desk. But the system doesn't care about what you did. It cares about what it can prove. And right now, it's their word against yours unless we fight. Darnell rubbed his hands together. They were still red from the cuffs. What happens next? We start by requesting the body cam footage, Williams replied. Then we subpoena bystander videos, witness testimonies. We gather every scrap of evidence that proves you weren't a threat. Because the report they filed? He slid a printed copy across the desk. They're saying you resisted arrest, that you refused to comply, that you reached for something. And unless we dismantle that narrative piece by piece, they'll bury you. Darnell stared at the page like it was written in another language. This wasn't him. This wasn't his life. But there it was in black and white. A manufactured version of reality, signed by Savannah Mitchell, badge number 8207. Michelle, seated beside him, whispered, "They're not going to get away with this, right?" Williams leaned forward. His voice was low, unwavering. "Only if we stay quiet." Outside, the city carried on as if nothing had happened. Horns blared, taxis weaved through traffic, pedestrians checked their phones, oblivious to the injustice unfolding just a few blocks away. But in that modest office, a war had quietly begun. "We're not just going after her," Williams continued. "We're going after the department, the culture, the chain of command that teaches rookies to see threats instead of people. But it won't happen overnight." Darnell's jaw tightened. "Why should I have to wait for justice?" Williams met his eyes. "Because justice always shows up late, but when it arrives, it can bring down the whole damn building." He handed Darnell a pen. "First, we file the official complaint. Then we build a case strong enough to make them sweat. But you have to be ready. They'll fight dirty. They'll discredit you. They'll twist everything. And when that doesn't work, they'll try to silence you." "I'm not backing down," Darnell said, his voice gaining strength. "They want me quiet. They picked the wrong man." Michelle nodded. "We've got the truth. That's our weapon." "No," Williams corrected. "The truth is the foundation. The weapon is what we build on top of it." The first court date would be weeks away. The hearings, the interviews, the public scrutiny, months. But as Darnell signed the documents, something inside him shifted. He was no longer just a man who'd been wrongfully arrested. He was a man preparing to fight back. The case file landed on Judge Marcus Carter's desk at exactly 6:43 a.m. The courthouse was still quiet, the city outside barely waking, but Carter was already seated, coffee untouched, sleeves rolled up, mind sharp. The man didn't need caffeine when injustice was on the line. He flipped open the folder, eyes scanning the front page, State versus Washington, Darnell. Arresting officer Savannah Mitchell. Charge, resisting arrest. His brow furrowed. Another one. He turned to the incident report, reading slowly, deliberately, dissecting each word like a surgeon searching for infection. Subject was non-compliant. Subject escalated the encounter. Officer applied restraint to ensure officer safety. It was textbook language. Too clean, too practiced, too convenient. He leaned back in his chair, tapping the file lightly against his knee. He'd read hundreds of these reports, enough to know when something didn't add up. This one stank. The timeline was too tight, the language too rigid, the escalation too sudden. Savannah Mitchell, according to the report, had detained Darnell Washington based solely on a vague disturbance call. Yet she never described the original complaint in any detail. No mention of verified witnesses, no supplemental statements, and no confirmation from dispatch. Carter's jaw tightened. He pressed the intercom. "Carson," he said to his clerk, "I want everything on this case. Pull the body cam footage, request external surveillance from the scene, and get me Officer Mitchell's full training history." "Yes, Your Honor," the voice replied. He hung up and stared at the manila folder like it had insulted him. "They think I won't see it," he murmured. "They think I'll sign off on another lie." His eyes drifted to the corner of his office, where a framed article hung on the wall, aged yellow now, preserved behind glass. 17-year-old wrongfully jailed, charges dropped after alibi confirmed. Below the headline was a grainy black and white photo, a young boy in handcuffs, eyes wide with disbelief, a bruised lip, torn shirt. It was him, Marcus Carter. He had been 17, walking home from a late school event, when two officers mistook him for a robbery suspect. No evidence, no apology, just assumptions, cuffs, and 3 months in juvenile detention before a janitor's testimony and school surveillance cleared his name. He never forgot the cold of that cell, the way the guards looked through him like he wasn't real, the way his mother's voice cracked when she visited, trying to stay strong while her son's future crumbled. That night after being released, he swore two things. He would never be powerless again, and he would make damn sure others weren't either. He turned back to the file. Darnell Washington. No criminal record. Employed, professional. Picked up outside a convenience store in broad daylight while waiting for his sister. A weekly lunch tradition, according to the supplemental affidavit. Savannah's report claimed he became verbally aggressive and reached suddenly into his pocket, prompting immediate detainment. But Carter had read enough to know when a report was written to protect, not to inform. And this one reeked of fear disguised as justification. He picked up his pen, writing in firm, deliberate strokes across a fresh legal pad. Timeline inconsistent. Use of force, justification unclear. Subject compliance not confirmed. Language suggests narrative shaping. Investigate body cam integrity. Training history of Officer Mitchell. There was no anger in his face, just cold, focused precision. The kind of intensity that had earned him the nickname, the Scale, in legal circles. Because in his courtroom, justice wasn't just blind, it was inevitable. He closed the folder and walked over to the window, watching the first rays of sunlight spill across the marble steps of the courthouse. It was peaceful out there, but peace could be deceptive. He knew that better than most. How many times had he seen this play out? A young black man criminalized for simply existing in public space. A rookie officer trying to prove herself. A department too willing to protect its own. A paper trail built to bury the truth. But not in his court, not this time. You picked the wrong judge, he whispered, eyes still on the horizon. He returned to his desk and flipped through Savannah Mitchell's personnel file. Top of her academy class. Impressive test scores. Minimal field complaints. But a few subtle red flags, comments from trainers noting rigid approach, difficulty accepting feedback, and tends to escalate when challenged. Buried under praise were warnings. The department had chosen to ignore them. There was a knock at the door. Carson entered, holding a small stack of preliminary footage. Body cams still being pulled from cloud storage. But here's security footage from a nearby cafe and gas station, he said, placing the USB on Carter's desk. Carter nodded. Good. And the officers' full training logs? Being overnighted from River Creek. Should arrive tomorrow. Carter inserted the USB into his monitor. The footage loaded. The timestamp matched the arrest report. He clicked play. There, in grainy but clear resolution, was Darnell Washington, standing, waiting, checking his phone. Calm, still, nothing threatening, nothing illegal. Then a police cruiser pulled up. Savannah stepped out, posture assertive. She approached quickly, words exchanged, no audio. Then her hand went to her belt. Darnell's hands rose. She stepped forward. Moments later, he was against the wall being cuffed. Carter paused the video, zoomed in, rewound, played again. There was no resistance, no sudden movement, no escalation except from the officer. He leaned back, exhaled through his nose and muttered, "She lied." Another innocent life, swallowed whole by fear, power, and paperwork. But this time, it would not go unseen. He opened a fresh folder on his desk, labeled it in bold black ink, Washington v. City, Judicial Inquiry. Justice, like the sunrise outside his window, might be slow, but it was rising, and Marcus Carter was wide awake. The courthouse was already packed when Darnell Washington stepped onto the polished marble floor of courtroom 4B. The first hearing. The moment everything would either begin to heal or fall apart completely. Every camera lens seemed to tilt in his direction. Every whisper quieted as he passed. But Darnell didn't flinch. He wore a crisp navy suit, not to impress, but to reclaim his dignity. Beside him stood his sister Michelle, clutching his hand so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Behind them sat his mother Patricia, stoic, proud, terrified. Across the aisle sat Officer Savannah Mitchell. She looked every bit the part pressed uniform, badge gleaming, hair in a tight regulation bun. But her eyes betrayed her. They shifted, darted, unable to rest in one place. She knew what was coming. She just didn't know when the walls would collapse. At exactly 9 a.m., The bailiff's voice rang through the chamber like a gunshot. All rise, the Honorable Judge Marcus Carter presiding. The murmurs died. Everyone stood as Judge Carter entered, his black robe trailing behind him like the shadow of justice itself. His expression was calm, but his eyes were sharp, surgical, unforgiving. He took his seat, gave a single nod, and said in a voice that brooked no interruption, "Be seated." "Let's begin." The state's attorney gave a brief opening, dry and procedural, reiterating the original justification for the arrest. Officer Mitchell responded to a suspicious activity call. The subject became noncompliant. Standard procedure followed. Then Marcus Williams stood. The room seemed to lean toward him, as if it knew the storm he was about to summon. "Your Honor," he began, voice steady, words crisp. "What happened on Marshall and 4th wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a training error. It was the weaponization of authority. And today we will show without question that Officer Mitchell fabricated key elements of her report to justify an unlawful arrest." He turned, nodding to the bailiff. "With the court's permission, we'd like to begin with video evidence." Judge Carter gave a curt nod. "Proceed." The lights dimmed. A large screen descended behind the judge's bench. The first video began to play silent at first. Captured from a nearby cafe's security camera, it showed Darnell standing calmly, scrolling on his phone. Back leaned lightly against the convenience store wall. His posture was relaxed, non-threatening. Then the cruiser appeared. Savannah exited, approached, spoke. Darnell looked up, replied. He didn't move aggressively. He didn't raise his voice. His body language was neutral. The screen cut to the second angle from the gas station across the street. This one had audio. "My sister works right there," Darnell could be heard saying. "We meet every Thursday." Then Savannah's voice, sharper than steel. "Hands where I can see them." Confused, Darnell asked, "I gave you my ID. Why am I—" "Step back now." The courtroom was dead silent as the third video played bystander footage. A cell phone, shaky but clear. It captured the moment Savannah forced Darnell's hands behind his back. "I'm not resisting," he shouted, panic in his voice. "You're being detained for non-compliance," she said coldly. As the lights came back on, Judge Carter sat perfectly still. Williams walked slowly to the center of the courtroom, holding a printed copy of Savannah's report. In her official report, Officer Mitchell claimed Mr. Washington exhibited agitated behavior and reached for an unknown object. "Your Honor, you've seen the footage. You've heard his voice. Do those words describe what we just witnessed?" Carter didn't reply. Williams turned to Savannah, who now sat visibly tense at the prosecution table. "Officer Mitchell, would you care to explain this discrepancy?" Her lawyer rose. "Objection, this line of questioning presumes guilt." "Overruled," Carter said immediately. "She will answer." Savannah stood, clearing her throat. "In the moment, I believe Mr. Washington's actions were unpredictable." Williams stepped forward. "Unpredictable? You mean standing with a phone in his hand?" I wasn't sure what he was reaching for," she said, faltering slightly. "I had to make a split-second decision." "Yet the video shows no sudden movement," Williams pressed. "No signs of aggression. So let me ask plainly, did Mr. Washington resist arrest?" Savannah paused. A long beat. "No," she whispered. "Louder for the record." "No," she said again, her voice cracking. "He didn't." There was a ripple through the courtroom, shocked gasps, murmurs, and Michelle's stifled sob. Williams took a step closer. "And yet you wrote in your report that he did. Why?" Savannah looked down. Her face was pale now. Her hands trembled. "I didn't want to look like I'd made the wrong call. I thought if I described it as more aggressive, it would justify the arrest. I didn't think it would—" She stopped herself, breath catching. "You didn't think it would what?" Williams asked, voice calm but cutting. "I didn't think it would go this far," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I wrote what I thought I had to protect myself." Williams turned to Judge Carter. "No further questions, Your Honor." Carter leaned forward slowly, fingers steepled beneath his chin. His voice was low, deliberate. "Officer Mitchell, you submitted a sworn report to this court, a document that falsely claimed a citizen resisted arrest. You submitted that report knowing it would affect his legal standing his career, and his freedom. And now, under oath, you admit that report was intentionally misleading. Savannah nodded, tears streaking her cheeks now. Yes, Your Honor. Then this court will take immediate action. He turned to his clerk. I am ordering an internal audit of all reports filed by Officer Savannah Mitchell during her tenure with the department. Every arrest, every use of force, every body cam clip, effective immediately. He faced the courtroom. This is not just about one arrest. This is about trust. And this courtroom will not become the final stop in a chain of systemic abuse. The gavel struck once. Sharp. Final. The courtroom erupted. Reporters raced for the exits, phones buzzing, keyboards clicking. Patricia broke into tears and Michelle collapsed into her brother's arms. Darnell, meanwhile, just sat there, frozen, breathing heavily, staring at the judge who had, without fanfare, just shattered the lie that almost ruined his life. He had come to court to defend his name, but now justice was chasing the one who tried to destroy it. And this time, it wasn't backing down. The fight for justice is just beginning. More shocking twists are ahead. Don't miss a moment. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay with us. Thank you for standing for truth and justice. Where are you watching from? Let us know. The fallout came faster than anyone expected. Just 72 hours after Savannah Mitchell's confession in Judge Carter's courtroom, a task force from Internal Affairs launched a full-scale review of every arrest she'd made during her 6-month training period. By day 4, the initial findings arrived, and they were damning. 13 cases, 13 arrests flagged for misconduct, 13 people, each one wrongfully detained under Savannah's badge and authority, each one marked by a system that had decided their guilt before they ever had a chance to speak. Judge Carter sat in his chambers, the case files spread across his desk like a graveyard of injustice. Page after page revealed a pattern. Vague probable cause, minimal evidence, excessive use of authority, and always the same language: non-compliant, suspicious, agitated. But the videos told a different story. One by one, Carter reviewed them. A college student pulled from his car for fitting a description. His crime was wearing a hoodie. A mother handcuffed in front of her children after demanding to know why she was being questioned. A teenager thrown to the ground for loitering near a bus stop. It wasn't just about Savannah Mitchell anymore. This wasn't the mistake of one rookie officer. This was a pattern, a culture, a sickness. And Savannah, it turned out, had been trained to spread it. She was suspended without pay, her badge revoked, her access to precinct systems locked. But that wasn't the end. 2 days later, she received a knock on her apartment door. FBI agents stood on the other side, flanked by a federal prosecutor. Miss Mitchell, the lead agent said, showing his credentials, we're opening a federal investigation into patterns of civil rights violations within the Metropolitan Police Department. You're a key witness and a subject of interest. Savannah's world stopped. She sat in a windowless conference room hours later, facing 2 agents and a tape recorder. She'd been offered limited immunity only if she cooperated fully. We have enough evidence to prosecute you, the agent said flatly, but we believe you were part of something larger, something orchestrated. We want names, dates, how the system works, how rookies are trained to escalate, and who trained you to lie. Her hands shook as she reached for the water bottle. She took a breath, and she started talking. By the end of the week, federal investigators had a clearer picture. There wasn't just a culture of silence inside the department. There was a playbook, a literal training guide, passed verbally from officer to officer, mentor to recruit, tactics, language, how to write a report that would hold up under scrutiny, how to frame compliance as resistance. Savannah gave them everything. The names of the field officers who taught her how to twist body cam footage with strategic positioning. The sergeant who told her to always include the phrase, furtive movement. The lieutenant who advised her to document only the parts of an incident that justified escalation. The higher-ups had called it assertive policing. But what it really was? A factory for injustice. And now the factory lights were flickering. Judge Carter reconvened his courtroom. Not for Darnell Washington's case that was already closed, but to open the door for the flood that was coming. They called them the others. The victims who had watched Darnell's case unfold and finally saw a path to speak. Jeremy Torres was first. He stood in the witness box, quiet, wiry 19-year-old, with a scar above his left eye. She said I was loitering near a school, he said, voice tight. I was on my way to my tutoring job. I told her, showed her my ID. She said I was being smart. Next thing I knew, I was face down on the pavement. He lost his job, missed the deadline for his scholarship application, never reapplied. Next came Aisha Reynolds, a single mother, arrested outside a grocery store for disorderly conduct after asking why officers were searching her bag. I lost my job at the daycare, she said. They said I brought negative attention. I wasn't convicted, but the arrest stayed on my record. I couldn't get hired again. She paused, tears threatening to spill. I couldn't afford rent. My son and I lived in my car for 3 months. Then came a pastor, a school nurse, a student athlete. One by one, their voices filled the courtroom with stories that echoed with the same pattern. Stopped, questioned, humiliated, written up as threats when all they had done was exist. Each one had been arrested by Savannah Mitchell or one of her training officers. Each case bore the same DNA, and each case, until now, had been buried under bureaucracy and fear. Savannah Mitchell sat alone in a sterile FBI conference room, the relentless hum of fluorescent lights hammering her ears. She had thought surrendering her badge ended her darkest fears, yet she discovered that was merely the doorway to a deeper abyss. Before her lay a thick folder labeled Multi-State Law Enforcement Corruption Mitchell Interview Materials, filled with documents, pictures, and transcripts. Over 300 victims spanned 15 states, each one subjected to bogus arrests or intimidation. If not for Judge Carter's relentless pursuit of truth, these cases would have stayed buried under shredded evidence in official silence. Now Savannah found herself stripped of her uniform and rank. She was no longer the ambitious officer the Academy once praised, but rather a young woman confronting the monstrous machine she had helped maintain. "Ms. Mitchell," said one of the agents, a man with wire-rimmed glasses, voice like sharpened steel, "please walk us through your recruitment timeline. You stated it began within your first month at the Academy. That correct?" She nodded, breathing unevenly. "They singled me out early," she said, eyes brimming with tears she tried to suppress. "I assumed it was because of my high scores in firearms, my performance in patrol simulations, and your willingness to enforce compliance," the agent interjected. She let out a shaky laugh. "Yes, back then I saw it as a compliment. Now I know better." All morning she had pored over horror stories about people ensnared by the same warped tactics she used on Darnell, Washington. A father missing his child's birth, locked away without cause. A college student losing scholarships after being arrested on false charges. A grandmother humiliated for carrying nothing but groceries. Every page cut deeper into Savannah's conscience, fueling a guilt that threatened to consume her. It was a brutal truth. She was never the heroine she'd imagined. She had become part of a machine fueled by prejudice, intimidation, and cunning. Its framework existed long before she pinned on a badge, and it identified her ambition and rigidity as prime traits for its operation. At the Academy, certain trainers repeated the same dogma: don't question your instincts, never show doubt. If a suspect's story threatened your version of events, rewrite reality to fit departmental needs. She soared academically, earning praise for her assertive presence, the instructors proud of her strong performance. But behind each pat on the back was a silent directive: escalate first, justify later. So on the day she unlawfully arrested Darnell, Washington, it felt almost routine, an extension of everything she'd been taught. Now she confronted the scope of that corruption: 300-plus victims in 15 states. Each name was an indictment of the system she served. The agent cleared his throat, drawing her attention back. "Ms. Mitchell, so far we see a pattern of training that goes beyond your city. You mentioned a fast track for proactive policing. Did you realize these tactics violated constitutional rights?" She forced herself to meet his gaze. "Not at first. They taught us criminals will say anything, that if the narrative didn't match standard guidelines, we had ways to fill in the blanks. They never called it lying, but that's what it was." Across town, Judge Marcus Carter presided in a hearing room considerably larger than his usual courtroom. This special session focused on Byron Jacobs, the Metropolitan Police Department's IT director. Jacobs had initially denied all wrongdoing, but evidence revealed that entire server logs were missing, body cam files corrupted, and metadata tampered with. Jacobs took the stand, sweat visible under the harsh lighting. Judge Carter locked him in a gaze that could slice through steel. "Mr. Jacobs," Carter began calmly, "the evidence indicates you deliberately deleted or altered video footage contradictory to official police reports. Do you deny it?" Jacobs swallowed. "No, Your Honor. I followed orders?" "From whom?" Carter demanded. "Which individuals authorized you to tamper with crucial evidence?" Jacobs looked ready to collapse in the witness box. "Captains, lieutenants, even a deputy chief. They said the footage would damage ongoing cases or create unwanted scrutiny. I was told to do my part or face consequences." Carter's jaw tightened. "So you knowingly obstructed justice?" Jacobs hung his head. "Yes, I understand now I was complicit. I'm sorry." Silence filled the hearing room. Finally, Carter spoke, his voice echoing like a verdict carved in stone. "This court will refer your testimony and the supporting evidence for a criminal investigation. Obstruction, conspiracy, civil rights violations. These are not mere words. They define the gravity of your actions." A hush settled. The local department's downfall was accelerating, sweeping along high-ranking officials who struggled to contain the crisis. Rumors spread of hurried resignations, destroyed emails, frantic calls to lawyers. Public trust eroded by the hour. 2 days later, squads of federal marshals surrounded Metropolitan Police Department headquarters, serving warrants and removing boxes of files, seizing computers. It looked more like a crime scene than a law enforcement hub. The institution that once symbolized order and safety now stood stripped of credibility. Meanwhile, a trove of Jacobs's emails revealed the corruption spanned multiple states. Training programs quietly transmitted the same set of manipulative tactics, ensuring new recruits were groomed to see threats where none existed. As soon as they finished training, these officers would relocate, carrying the contamination to new jurisdictions. Official statements tried to downplay it, but the numbers continued to climb. Over 300 documented victims, and more testimonies surfaced daily. Savannah monitored these developments in real time, courtesy of texts and calls from investigators. Each update hammered her guilt. She once thought she was just doing her job, making tough decisions. Now she saw the monstrous apparatus behind those decisions, a hidden pipeline forging officers in fear and false authority. One sleepless night in a drab motel, she wept uncontrollably. She remembered a day at the academy. Her instructor praised her for instantly treating a role-play suspect as hostile. "You have an eye for suspicious behavior," he said. She had beamed with pride, never suspecting they'd been scouting her from day one. She sobbed into a thin pillow, consumed by shame for the lives she'd torn apart. By dawn, she decided to stand fully with the FBI, not just cooperating, but stepping forward to destroy the machine that made her. That morning, she walked into Judge Carter's courtroom as a key witness, the tension palpable. On one side, federal prosecutors. On the other, the city's legal defenders, pale and stiff. The gallery brimmed with reporters, eager for every detail. She took the stand, shoulders rigid, voice trembling with nerves. Carter gazed at her, his expression sober but resolute. "Miss Mitchell," said the lead federal prosecutor, "state your name and former position." She inhaled. "Savannah Mitchell." "Formerly Officer Savannah Mitchell of the Metropolitan Police Department." "How long did you serve?" 1 year total, 6 months probationary, 6 months fully sworn. "During that time, were you taught methods that violate standard guidelines? Methods explicitly aimed at escalating encounters and falsifying reports?" Her pulse thumped. "Yes, from the start, we were shown how to phrase everything as a threat, how to label a citizen's question as verbal aggression, how to classify any flinch as resistance. They said never doubt your instincts because a good cop always senses danger." "And how widespread is this practice?" Her tears threatened again. "It spans at least 15 states. Officers transfer and bring these methods with them, training rookies to adopt the same approach. It's huge." The gallery recoiled in silent horror. This was no localized scandal, it was a national crisis unfolding in real time. That same week, multiple high-ranking officials in the Metropolitan Police Department were arrested. Captains and a deputy chief faced charges of conspiracy to violate civil rights and obstruction of justice. The city reeled. News helicopters circled overhead, capturing footage of uniformed officers escorting their own superiors to waiting squad cars. Sirens blared against a chaotic backdrop. City Hall scrambled. The mayor gave a halting press conference, vowing reforms, but it was too late. Public trust had cratered. Citizens marched in protest, outraged at the betrayal. Civil rights organizations demanded sweeping changes, not shallow apologies. Within a small safe house on the edge of town, Savannah watched the carnage on a flickering TV. She saw colleagues, once mentors, handcuffed and shoved into cars. A year earlier, she would have been horrified. Now she felt only numb acceptance. The machine was being dismantled, piece by rotten piece. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. An FBI agent leaned in, expression solemn. "We have a grand jury hearing tomorrow. They'll want your sworn deposition. Still willing?" She stood, straightening her back. "Yes," she said. "I'll do whatever it takes." She couldn't resurrect the dreams she had crushed, but maybe her testimony would bring justice for those left voiceless. Redemption seemed an impossible goal still. It was worth trying. Judge Carter, meanwhile, observed from his office window as reporters, lawyers, and anxious families crowded the courthouse steps. A mountain of evidence and testimonies lay ahead. This might grow beyond 15 states once more victims realized they could speak. Carter thought back to his own youth, caged for a crime he never committed. That memory fueled his resolve to expose every lie, hold every conspirator accountable, and champion every victim robbed of their dignity. Savannah was both the perpetrator and the witness to something bigger. If more insiders followed her lead, the entire blueprint of deceit could be exposed. Carter knew real reform demanded more than punishing a few scapegoats. It required uprooting the culture that taught cadets to see the world as an endless battlefield. He harbored hope that these revelations might start that vital process. Across the city, protests intensified, some turning confrontational. Citizens vented their fury at a system that endangered them, rather than providing safety. Signs and chants called for new leadership, independent oversight, and a drastic overhaul of training programs. On social media, stories poured in. Everyday people recounting interactions with officers who treated them like criminals for standing on the wrong sidewalk, asking the wrong question, or simply existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. The sheer weight of these accounts hammered at the department's last fragile defenses, toppling any illusions that the problem was just a few bad apples. The orchard itself was rotten. If a department in one city could quietly train officers to violate rights, what was happening elsewhere? More emails surfaced showing how traveling consultants, retired officers, led seminars on efficient policing, teaching the same manipulative techniques. Rookie after rookie left these seminars with the false belief that suspicion was a virtue. They'd learned to stage body cam angles, produce consistent keywords in their reports, and undermine bystanders' videos as out of context. The result was a tapestry of manufactured truths, now unraveling in spectacular fashion. Savannah saw these revelations each time she opened her phone. She read text after text describing new victims like an avalanche burying any hope of quick resolution. But she forced herself to read them all. Shame was the least she owed. When dawn broke, she arrived at the courthouse basement for the grand jury session. Marcus Williams, representing many of the victims, stood outside. Their eyes met. She braced for contempt, but found only steely composure. "Williams," she whispered, "I'm sorry." His gaze flickered with complicated emotion. "Tell that to the people who lost everything. But first, tell the grand jury everything you know." She nodded, heart pounding. She recalled the first day she met him, back when she was confident Darnell Washington's arrest was justified. Now, all that confidence had shattered. The only thing left was truth. Upstairs, Judge Carter prepared for another day of testimony. He could feel the tide of history shifting under his feet. The old system was cracking, and if enough courageous voices emerged, maybe they could build something better. Savannah understood. Her life as a police officer was finished. Even if she avoided prison, her name was forever tied to corruption. But if speaking out meant preventing another wave of traumatized citizens, she would do it. She'd repeat her story 1,000 times if needed, detailing every secret directive, every quiet hallway conversation that shaped her into the officer who destroyed lives without blinking. She walked into the grand jury chamber, shoulders squared. As the door closed behind her, she inhaled deeply and stood ready to answer every question. She would not lie. She would not omit. She wanted them to see the dark blueprint of a system that fed on fear, the machine that had once claimed her soul. Down the corridor, in a separate room, families of the victims waited anxiously for any news. Some held placards with photographs of loved ones. Others clutched legal documents that had cost them their savings in futile attempts to clear their names. Their collective trauma now found a focused target, the apparatus that Savannah and others like her had embodied. As Savannah was led in for her testimony, she could almost feel the weight of those stares through the walls. Each person out there had a story, a scar, a memory of a night behind bars or a humiliating search on the street. She had once dismissed such tales as rare exceptions, if she even thought of them at all. Now she could not escape them. Each face she imagined gave her the resolve to speak, detail by detail, until the grand jury had no choice but to act. And if the system decided to punish her further, she would accept it. It was, she realized, the only path left that aligned with what was left of her conscience. She was not seeking forgiveness from the world she was seeking to right, in some small measure, the many wrongs she had helped inflict. Perhaps, after all of this, she would find a measure of peace, because once a person recognizes they have become part of the darkness they once believed they were fighting, there is no turning back. The only choice is to shine light on every hidden place. And with that light, maybe some measure of justice, long delayed, would finally be born from the ashes of a broken system. Enough said. The final verdict arrived on a clear morning that felt oddly peaceful. News vans lined the curb outside the courthouse, cameras poised for the outcome they knew would reverberate through the city. Protesters mingled with supporters, each convinced this ruling would transform everything. Inside, tension filled the corridors like a physical force. This was the day Darnell Washington's lawsuit would be decided. He entered the courtroom wearing a simple navy suit, his sister Michelle beside him. She squeezed his hand as they made their way to the plaintiff's table. Across the aisle sat Savannah Mitchell, flanked by her legal counsel. Dark circles underscored her eyes, and the confident posture she once displayed had melted into something bordering on resignation. Darnell felt a pang of sorrow. He remembered how she had once seemed invincible, the embodiment of power. Now she looked like someone who had finally recognized the cost of following a broken system. The bailiff called for order. Judge Marcus Carter appeared, robe billowing behind him. The hush was instant, reverent. He settled behind the bench, surveying the room before placing his hands on a neat stack of documents. After careful deliberation, he began, voice echoing in the silent chamber, this court finds the Metropolitan Police Department liable for the wrongful arrest of Mr. Darnell Washington, as well as the subsequent violations of his civil rights. Accordingly, the city shall provide compensatory and punitive damages. A collective murmur arose. Michelle clutched Darnell's arm, tears shimmering in her eyes. He felt relief surge within, a knot in his stomach unwinding after months of tension. The shackles of doubt had weighed heavily, but finally a court had affirmed that what happened to him was not just unfortunate, it was unlawful. Carter raised a hand, restoring silence. The significance of this verdict extends beyond financial restitution. We have established a pattern of misconduct that harmed not just Mr. Washington, but others as well. This ruling forces a reckoning, one that must catalyze true reform. He paused, turning to Savannah. Miss Mitchell, rise. She stood, trembling hands clasped in front of her. Her gaze flickered with a mixture of guilt and resignation. Carter's tone grew firm. You provided critical testimony exposing systemic corruption, yet you also participated in harmful acts. This court sentences you to 5 years, with 3 suspended, contingent upon full cooperation in a mandatory reform program. You will serve 2 years of incarceration, followed by 3 years supervised release. During that time, you will assist federal oversight committees in dismantling the flawed training that led to these abuses. A faint sob escaped Savannah's lips. She gave a shaky nod. The hush in the courtroom thickened, each person grappling with the gravity of what had transpired. Carter closed the file, exhaling. Justice, he said, isn't about punishment alone. It's about creating change so that no one else endures what Mr. Washington endured. Then his gavel struck. Pandemonium erupted, reporters shouting questions, onlookers bursting into discussion. Darnell stood, Michelle's hand in his, absorbing the surreal scene. He wasn't sure whether to weep or celebrate. He felt exhaustion and triumph coexisting. Outside, a knot of journalists swarmed. Microphones thrust at him, cameras flashing. He spoke calmly, offering measured gratitude. It was never just about me, he said. If this ensures others won't suffer the same fate, we've achieved something meaningful. Meanwhile, Savannah was led past, escorted by marshals. Their eyes met briefly. She mouthed a wordless apology. He answered with a nod, acknowledging the complexity of their shared ordeal. How could he hate her fully when she too had been ensnared by a monstrous system? In the days that followed, the city announced sweeping changes: the formation of an independent oversight board, mandatory body cam protocols, and rigorous transparency standards. Some citizens scoffed, calling it a political gesture. Others saw it as a watershed moment. Darnell watched from a distance, hopeful yet cautious. Reform meant more than fancy statements. It demanded tangible shifts in culture and accountability. Marcus Williams, his tenacious attorney, confirmed the settlement. The amount was substantial, but Darnell felt a hollow pang. Money alone couldn't erase the memory of being handcuffed, nor could it restore the faith he'd lost. He resolved to direct much of it toward organizations combating wrongful arrests and providing legal aid. Michelle admired his dedication. She had stood by him through every legal hurdle, comforting him on sleepless nights when nightmares replayed the scene of his arrest. Now she became his ally in forging something good out of the storm. They set up a small foundation, awarding grants to those with stories similar to Darnell's people, whose lives were upended by questionable policing. Yet life had to go on. One Thursday, they decided to reclaim their lunch tradition. Instead of returning to the convenience store corner, they picked a cozy cafe with large windows that let in natural light. The difference was stark. No sirens, no suspicious glares. They sat together, grateful for the simple act of ordering food without fear. As they waited, Michelle studied him. "You look lighter," she observed softly. He smiled. "I feel lighter. It's strange I'm still processing everything, but at least the weight of proving my innocence is gone." She nodded, remembering all the times he'd insisted on telling people his side, only to be dismissed. Now a judge had validated his story. That counted for something. Their sandwiches arrived. They ate slowly, punctuating bites with quiet jokes and comfortable silence. The last time they tried to share lunch, his life had been torn apart. Today they savored the freedom to exist peacefully. Stepping outside afterward, they found themselves reluctant to part ways. They wandered a nearby park, watching families picnic and children play. Life went on, oblivious to the battles that had raged for months. Darnell felt a tear slip down his cheek, part relief, part mourning for the innocence he once had. Later that evening, he sat in his living room, flipping through messages from strangers who had followed his case. Many were supportive, thanking him for paving the way for future lawsuits. A few were hostile, blaming him for tarnishing the department's reputation. He shook his head. Institutions that hid wrongdoing were responsible for their own downfall, not the victims who exposed it. Meanwhile, in a guarded facility, Savannah began the first weeks of her term. She had no illusions that she'd be forgiven or lauded. She had chosen, at least, to lay bare the twisted indoctrination that shaped her policing methods. Reports emerged that she spent hours dissecting training manuals with reform experts, pointing out subtle cues that nudged new officers toward aggression. Even behind bars, she had a job to do if she wanted to make amends. Judge Carter oversaw additional hearings as more victims stepped forward. The revelations seemed endless. Darnell tried to attend when possible, lending moral support. Each new testimony felt like another layer of the city's ugly secret peeled back. Yet each story validated his own, reassuring him that he wasn't alone or exceptional. He was part of a chorus that had been silenced for too long. A A month later, the newly formed Oversight Board held its inaugural meeting. Members included community leaders, retired judges, civilian activists, and even a few forward-thinking officers. Darnell was invited to speak. Nervous, he recalled how the system nearly crushed him. He spoke honestly, describing the casual terror of realizing your truth means nothing when someone in uniform decides otherwise. He concluded by urging them not to let bureaucratic inertia dull the sincerity of their mission. The board members offered thanks, some with tears in their eyes. He left the meeting more hopeful than before, sensing that real changes were in motion. Walking home, he felt the sun's warmth on his face, a reminder that the simplest pleasures still held magic after all the darkness. Soon, Michelle texted him with good news. Their foundation had approved its first grant to help a single mother who'd been fired after a wrongful arrest. He grinned at his phone, tears welling again. Finally, he was in a position to give hope instead of pled for it. He kept busy. Some days he joined panel discussions or gave interviews. Others, he simply tried to live. He read novels, reconnected with old friends, even took up jogging to clear his head. Though the city still buzzed with controversy, he discovered that calm moments felt sweeter for having once been stolen from him. One Thursday, they tried a new cafe. The server recognized Darnell from the news and quietly thanked him for what he'd done. It felt surreal, but also uplifting, like the city itself was gradually healing. Over lunch, Michelle and he mapped out a potential scholarship in honor of those who lost educational opportunities due to bogus charges. Each new idea fueled his belief that their fight could blossom into something bigger than a single lawsuit. That night, as he scrolled through social media, he noticed a swirl of debate about Savannah's program. Some argued she deserved harsher punishment. Others believed her forced cooperation was a critical piece of dismantling the old policing model. Darnell mulled it over, concluding that if her knowledge saved even one innocent person from handcuffs, it served a purpose. He never wanted revenge anyway, only justice. Meanwhile, a local TV station ran a profile on the new oversight measures. Footage showed police cadets practicing de-escalation techniques with community volunteers. It felt revolutionary, if also overdue. Darnell recognized a face or two officers who once mocked soft policing. Now they had no choice but to adapt. In a short interview, a training officer admitted that things have changed and we must change too. Encouraging words, yet time would tell. Michelle found him watching the segment. She stepped behind him, resting a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Small steps," she murmured. He sighed. "Yeah, but at least they're steps in the right direction." She nodded. "Hey, we forgot to plan tomorrow's lunch." He smiled. "We'll find another cafe. Maybe the one by the river?" Her eyes lit up. "Perfect. I hear they have great soup." So they continued forging small rituals to reclaim a sense of normalcy. Each meal, each stroll, each quiet joke was a testament to their resilience. When he thought about that day he'd been arrested, a shudder sometimes ran through him. But it passed, replaced by the knowledge that he had turned pain into progress. He kept up with therapy too, recognizing that trauma doesn't vanish just because a judge says you're vindicated. Late at night, images of that patrol car sometimes flickered in his dreams, but each time, he reminded himself that he was now free. A faulty system had tried to label him a criminal, and it failed. As the weeks turned into months, the city became something almost unrecognizable from the place it was before. Investigative journalists uncovered deeper layers of abuse, prompting more resignations. The department's upper echelons saw a wave of retirements, and fresh leadership emerge. Some decried it as a purge. Others embraced it as necessary renewal. Darnell watched with cautious optimism. One day a package arrived at his door. Inside was a framed letter from a young woman in another state. She wrote that she'd followed his case online, drawing courage to file her own lawsuit after an unjust arrest. "You showed me that the truth can prevail," the letter read. Tears pricked at Darnell's eyes as he read. He set it on his shelf, a reminder that each voice can inspire another. He and Michelle hosted a small gathering in their mother's house to celebrate the steps forward, like the foundation grants and local reforms. A few of the recipients came, telling their stories over hot coffee and pastries. Laughter filled the air, though tinged with sadness for what each had suffered. The sense of community, however, was undeniable. They were forging new bonds from the rubble of injustice. Meanwhile, Savannah's progress updates trickled through official channels. She was helping rewrite entire sections of police manuals, identifying key phrases that instructors once used to rationalize bias. Some said it was too little, too late. Others insisted it was crucial to peel back the curtain on how prejudice got institutionalized. Darnell, for his part, believed in the value of truth from any source willing to speak. He had seen enough to know that silence was the real enemy. Eventually, the uproar faded from front-page headlines, replaced by new crises. But that didn't erase the deeper changes stirring. Civilian review boards continued their work. Body cam oversight became the norm, and Darnell's face occasionally popped up in local coverage of activism events. Though he still recoiled a bit at the spotlight, he accepted that it was part of staying vigilant. On another bright Thursday, he and Michelle found themselves exploring a lunch spot near the museum district. They ordered, laughed about small things, and marveled at how ordinary the day felt. Halfway through the meal, Michelle raised her glass of iced tea. "To us," she said softly, "and to everyone who dared to speak up." He clinked his water glass against hers. "Here, here." They drank, letting the noise of city life swirl around them. It was a perfect slice of normalcy, the kind he once feared he'd never reclaim. The memory of that day outside the store might never fully vanish, but it no longer controlled him. Finally, as they wrapped up, Michelle insisted on paying. "Besides," she teased, "the city gave you that giant check. You can spare me the lunch bill at least once." He snorted a laugh. "I'm pretty sure I've donated most of it by now." She gave a mock pout, and they both grinned. If this story moved you, if it stirred anger, hope, or determination, please like, subscribe, and share. Each voice raised against injustice strengthens the chances for real change. Let's ensure no one else faces what Darnell endured, and let's keep shining light into places once hidden in the dark.